Good afternoon. Now this is a part of the work that we definitely will not speak about to anyone at any time, except it be that you are teaching an advanced class. This is a part of the truth for which Jesus was crucified. He did not think it unseemly to do the works of God. He made himself equal with God. In what way did he make himself equal with God? In what way did he think it not unseemly to do the works of God? He knew, where he phrased it, I and the Father are one. He knew that if God is infinite divine consciousness, that he also must be infinite divine consciousness, or he wouldn't be one with God. He knew that if God is eternal life, that he must be eternal life if he was one with God. He knew that all that you say about God must also be true about himself, or there wouldn't be one, there would be two. Every time you turn to a practitioner for help and get it, your practitioner has thought it not unseemly to do the works of God, because it is to God that you look for your healing, and here is your practitioner bringing it about. How is it possible for your practitioner to bring about a healing that is God's work? Because you know it wouldn't have taken place if the practitioner hadn't been there. Otherwise you wouldn't have called the practitioner if you'd known how to bring it about without. How then is the practitioner able to do the work of God unless the very healing power of God is the healing power of the practitioner? Unless the very soul of God is the soul of the practitioner? Unless the very love, the divine love of God is the divine love of the practitioner? And these are one, not two. Now, when Jesus fed the multitudes, multiplied loaves and fishes, you really wouldn't expect anyone but God to have the power to do that, would you? And yet here was Jesus on earth doing it. No wonder he was stoned and finally crucified. Only God was supposed to perform those miracles. And in the early days of the church, whenever anyone was holy enough, consciously one with the Father, to bring about healings, they also were driven out. You know, all these saints in the church, all these people who have been sainted for their healing power, were only sainted centuries after they were dead. They were persecuted while they were alive. They were thought to be witches. It is only in our generation that it is thought not unseemly for us to do healing work. Before that, we may even have been burned at the stake in New England if anyone had come to our home and been healed. That was the work of God. Now, of course, there is a secret behind that. And the secret is that I and the Father are one. There is not God end. And while you know that now from having read it, here in this class this afternoon you must face it in its broader aspects. And we will start, just for illustration, we will start with ourselves here. And let me put it this way. It just so happens that I am the teacher of this class, but it would be equally true, whoever the teacher was, of spiritual truth, not the mental sciences. The class, the individuals comprising the class, are in and of my consciousness. And they partake of the nature of my consciousness. In the degree that my consciousness is uplifted, is in tune with the infinite, is abiding in the Word and spiritual consciousness, in that degree, do you feel the peace, the harmony, the joy, the love of life? In the degree that I would be discordant, fearful, sensual, you would feel a disturbance, an inharmony, a discord. You might not identify it and know what it is, and certainly you wouldn't know who to blame for it. But you see, you have brought yourself here into my consciousness. And I am as responsible for you through that as a shepherd would be responsible for his flock. No doubt about that. Now, I know from many years of experience that the degree of my upliftment, the degree of my God consciousness, determines the degree of harmony, peace, joy, prosperity, health, and wholeness of those who constitute my practice or student body. It is for that reason that in the earlier years of my practice, every winter I was busy with many, sometimes hundreds of calls for grippe, flu, cold, pneumonia. And then one winter, an experience took place that opened my consciousness to the depth of these statements, I and the Father are one. I left the office one evening with, as I remember it, 29 calls having come in that afternoon on the phone from people with different stages of cold, grippe, and flu. It was in a New England winter season. And when I came in the morning, almost before I could get comfortable in the office, there were 6 more calls. And at that particular time, I was very busy, and of course, as a Christian Science practitioner, you're not allowed to have a class or talk to more than one person at a time. So my office, my waiting room, was usually filled, and I was continuously seeing people. And for that reason, the appointment book was always filled. On this particular day, when I went to my appointment book at 1 o'clock, I found there were no appointments scheduled from 1 to 2. And that never happened to me. And I hadn't done it consciously or deliberately, and I wondered, what's wrong here? What's happened here? What does this mean? And then it flashed on me, I didn't do that. I had nothing to do with that. That must have been God's work. There must be a reason for this. And so I closed the office doors just as if I were in there with a patient. And I sat down and I said, well, Father, this has a meaning. Let me know it. And as I sat there in meditation, this is what came. You haven't got 35 cases of colds and flu. You only have 1. And that 1 is a belief in a power apart from God. It's a belief in a selfhood apart from God. It's a belief that there are powers operating in consciousness other than God consciousness, God power. And that's all you have to meet. Can you accept power outside of God, the one consciousness, the one divine mind, which is your only mind? Can you acknowledge that there is some power operating outside of your own consciousness? That was a new idea. And you know that during the afternoon, I had called every one, or very nearly every one of these patients were healed right there and then in that afternoon. And I thought, here, this is something. Just as soon as the truth of being registered in my consciousness, all these people were released. It wasn't a question of giving them a treatment. It wasn't even a question of meditating for them. It wasn't a question of thinking about them. It was a question of when the truth of being registered in my consciousness, everyone who had brought themselves to my consciousness was healed. Oh, what a responsibility that is for me. I have got to be entertaining the truth of being all the time, and then anyone or any 35 or 300 who come to it partake of the nature of the truth operating as my consciousness. Well, the next day I had a call to go out to the Christian Science Benevolent Home, and when I got out there, the lady who was at the desk at the door spoke to me a while, and she said, "We've got a nice mess out here." "What is it?" "Well," she said, "about 25 or 30% of our guests here are laid out with flu, and more than 20% of our nurses and staff." And I said a very strange thing. I said, "You ought to be ashamed to say that. That's your fault." Oh, she looked at me. "What do you mean, my fault?" I said, "Aren't you supposed to be the attendant at the door here at the entrance?" "Yeah." "That's sort of like being a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord, isn't it? You're supposed to stand guard at this door and see that nobody gets past here that hasn't business here." "Well, that's right." I guess, but this isn't a material edifice. This isn't a material universe. And this isn't a material door. The only door there is the door of consciousness. And the only door you're responsible for is your consciousness. Now, what have you allowed to get past your door, your consciousness? First place, you have sat right here at the door and accepted the fact that infection and contagion is a power in this edifice. Well, what have I got to do with it? Well, you're the doorkeeper. You're the one sitting here to keep out intruders, to find out that nobody gets past that hasn't rightful business here. How does a belief of infection and contagion have a right to get into this edifice? For a moment, she thought I was really trying to hold her personally responsible, and I said, "Of course, the personal responsibility isn't on your shoulders so far as the home is concerned, but actually it is. You have no more business to be sitting there without the realization that nothing can enter the doorway of consciousness, the entrance of consciousness, except the truth of being, and that these suggestions of human power, physical power, material power, are not laws." Well, I said, "What would that have to do with the institution? I can see where it would help me, but said, I'm not the one who has the grip." And then I brought out this point. Well, no, if you are the doorkeeper of the institution, this institution has become part of your responsibility, and it's not physical. You seem to think this is physical. If you kept the wrong people out, you'd be doing your duty. But there aren't any wrong people. She commenced to catch the idea. And she said, "Now, where do I go from there?" And I said, "Well, as I see it," and I said, this only came to me yesterday, "you are having evidence presented to you of a power apart from God called infection contagion. And that belief has entered this doorway, this house, your consciousness, and you haven't handled it. You haven't consciously realized that infection and contagion may be beliefs, and they may be appearances, and they may be all true according to the materia medica sign, but actually, in the light of God, there's only one power. And not only that power is God's power, but I want you to know something more. That power is the activity of truth in your individual consciousness, one with God as a majority. Well, you know, that was something bigger than she had ever contemplated. But before we got through, she saw this point that I am making, that any belief that would enter this class must get through my consciousness. And any truth of being in my consciousness must act as a law of annihilation to any false belief that would intrude. And that woman called me up the next day and said that there was not 5% of the cases today that there were yesterday. She said that healing went through that building like a miracle. That people just popped up, healed all of a sudden. Nurses, staff, patients. She never saw anything like it. Later on, she lost her job for telling this to somebody. Now, it's a drastic thing to come to the realization that your consciousness is God consciousness. And that everything that comes within range of your consciousness will take on the nature and character of your consciousness. The Word becomes flesh. There's no such thing as a consciousness out here. There is only my consciousness and your consciousness. And we are responsible for what gets past the door of that consciousness, the entrance of that consciousness, because we do not only affect our own lives by what gets past, but everyone who has brought themselves to our consciousness, everyone who looks to us, and that means the members of our family, sometimes the members of our community and church, they look to us for bread and we give them a stone. They look to us for the truth of being, and we're so busy thinking our own thoughts of our own discords and inharmonies that they get turned away without the divine substance for which they came to us. When a beggar comes to our door, even though he only asks for a meal, that is not what he came for. Never under any circumstance or condition. He came for the bread of life. I'll bet no one in his life ever begged for a loaf of bread that wouldn't have said 10 times more thank you for the bread of life than for a piece of physical bread. Now then, everyone who comes into our home for companionship, for supply, for any form of good, even though in their own belief they're coming there for something of material nature. Actually, that's not what brought them there. They have come for bread. They have come for substance. And if we give them money and give them that alone, if we give them our physical, human companionship and give them that alone, we are giving them a stone. We are not giving them consciousness or the bread of life. We can only give them consciousness or the bread of life in the degree that we are entertaining the consciousness of truth within our being and doing it continuously and doing it specifically as they come to us. Now then, my world is embodied in my consciousness, and my world reflects the state of my consciousness. Remember that. My consciousness governs my world. My consciousness of truth is the law unto my world, and on the other hand, my ignorance of truth becomes a law unto it by belief. In other words, the absence of light would be a law of darkness, wouldn't it? Even though there isn't a law of darkness because it can be removed. Yet darkness would claim presence in the absence of light. And so in the absence of truth for my consciousness, ignorance, lie, appearance, discord, and inharmony would be made manifest. Therefore, my world will reflect back chance, luck, human belief, medical belief, theological belief, astrological belief, in the absence of the activity of truth in my consciousness. But with the activity of truth operating in and as my consciousness, that becomes a law of harmony unto everything in my world. It makes my body well, it makes my business well, it makes my activity well, it makes my practice well, it makes my student body well. It makes everything concerning me reflect the harmony of my consciousness. Because, as a matter of fact, business, let us say, in and of itself can't be good or bad. If you had a retail store, it couldn't be good or bad of itself. It would have to reflect the consciousness of its owner. If the consciousness of the owner permitted that store to be untidy, if it permitted that store to have unkempt employees and negligent employees, what kind of business would be there? And on the other hand, if the consciousness of the employer was one that demanded orderliness and right service and right values, now how would the business be? The business couldn't be good or bad of itself any more than your home can be clean or dirty in and of itself. There is no way for your home to be clean or dirty in and of itself. Your home is a direct reflection of your consciousness of home, just as even in the matter of beauty, there is no such thing as a beautiful home or a not beautiful home. A home couldn't be beautiful or not beautiful. It can only be a reflection of the degree of beauty of the individual who prepares or maintains or sustains that home. Now then, there's no such thing as a condition in itself anywhere in the world. All conditions reflect the activity of the consciousness of the individual concerned or individuals concerned. And so it is that your world and my world is a reflection of our consciousness or an expression of our consciousness. When our consciousness is imbued with truth, our universe expresses harmony, orderliness, prosperity, joy, peace, power, dominion. When our consciousness has an absence of truth, which is accepting world values and world beliefs, then our world takes on the complexion of, as I say, the chance, change, luck, all those things that govern world belief. Now then, before the days of spiritual truth, well, I couldn't say before the days, there never has been a time before the days. Let's put it this way then, that before the days when truth came to you and to me, we had very little to say about whether we were sick or well, whether we were prosperous or not prosperous, whether our affairs were in order or not in order, because you couldn't blame us for what was happening. We weren't responsible. It just happened. That was all. And we could always find 1,000 legitimate reasons for it, and they were all correct. Today, we can only hide behind that to a very minor degree. We might say today, I'm sorry I can't show forth 100% of God perfection because I haven't attained an awareness, a consciousness of 100% God consciousness. But I will show a great degree of that God consciousness, and by that I mean to a lesser degree I will not be subject to the conditions of the world. To some degree, yes, to the degree in which I have not yet attained complete dominion through God consciousness, through a knowledge of truth. So that when I say that in our class we should not only have far less of sickness, I don't mean the sickness that existed before, I mean the sickness that could eventuate through these weather conditions. We should have far less of it than the same amount of people outside in the world, and we should be healed of it about 10 times more quickly, whatever is. Why? First of all, it is the function of the teacher to maintain such a state of consciousness of truth that nothing can enter that defileth or maketh a lie. Therefore, when the student comes into the consciousness of the teacher, they should find nothing there but truth and love. Now, we put it again in simple language. If you brought yourself to my consciousness, and I am completely filling myself with the divine ideas of life, truth, and love, you should so feel that consciousness as to settle down into peace, harmony, wholeness, completeness, perfection, health. If you brought yourself to this classroom, and you not knowing it, my consciousness was busy with fears, doubts, hesitations, sense fears, sensuality, lust, animality, greed. Now what do you think you'd feel from that? You know right well what you feel, don't you? You feel a sense of discord, and I wish I could get out of that room in a hurry. You wouldn't know why. Maybe you wouldn't even blame the one on the platform. But that's who'd be to blame. Because the entire room takes on the atmosphere, just as Jesus' robe was a healing influence. It took on the atmosphere of his consciousness. So does the whole room take on the consciousness, the atmosphere of the consciousness of the one in charge of the room. Now then, in proportion as I, as a teacher, would hold my consciousness filled with ideas of truth and love, inharmonies and discord must be eliminated from your experience. But you have the same responsibility. In proportion as your consciousness is filled with ideas of truth and love, all those who come to you, even if it's a tradesman on the corner that you're dealing with, all those who pass you in the street, all those who have business relations, family relations, social relations, all of them must partake to some degree of that consciousness of truth of yours, and of course they will partake of it in the nature, in the degree in which they're reaching out. Some who are not reaching out at all will merely say, oh, that's strange, that person is always nice to be around, and that'll be the end of that. But those who know something of this will know right well what they're dealing with. They're dealing with Christ consciousness, a consciousness imbued with the truth of being, always steadfast in its realization of God as the one power. Now, actually, you see, that makes God out of your individual consciousness. It makes your individual consciousness the God power that makes it possible for you to do the work of God. It makes your consciousness and God consciousness equal, because now it is not two consciousnesses, but one. Consciousness imbued with truth is God consciousness. And consciousness imbued with Christ, with love, is God consciousness. Therefore, Your consciousness is God consciousness when it is imbued with truth, life, and love. And in that case, it is not unseemly to expect you to do the works of God. Now, in the degree that you do not keep and maintain your consciousness filled with life, truth, and love, in that degree do those who touch you on life's highway not find you doing the works of God, not find you spreading this harmony and peace abroad in the world. Now, Jesus, realizing that he lived a continuous life of meditation, Jesus, realizing that he was never seeking a demonstration for himself, that personal I that we call the devil. Jesus, living, moving, and having his being continuously in the realization of the Father within, could say, thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, because I haven't anything in my consciousness but God. And that's what you're looking at, and that's what you're feeling. And that's why he could do the works of God. So, we become a law unto our universe. And watch this. We become a law unto each other. I become a law unto you, a law of harmony in proportion to the truth and love I maintain in my consciousness. I become a law of discord and inharmony unto you in proportion as I allow thoughts of the world to occupy me. But I say me because I mean you. I mean that in proportion as you entertain truth, life, love, spiritual truth, the truth of being, the reality of being, in your consciousness, do you become a law unto your universe, which includes your family, the schoolroom in which you teach, the church in which you teach or preach. You become a law unto it in the degree of truth, life, and love maintained in your consciousness. You become a law of failure unto it in the degree that you indulge the personal I, me, and mine. Now, consciousness filled with truth is God consciousness, and it will do the works of God. Do not be surprised or think it unseemly. It will do the work of God, whether that consciousness is mine or yours or his or hers. The consciousness imbued with truth, anchored in truth, rooted and grounded in truth, the consciousness that admits nothing into it but thoughts and ideas that emanate from God. Reality, that consciousness is God consciousness, and if it appears as Buddha, it will do the healing works in the days of Buddha, and if it appears as Jesus Christ, it will do the healing works in the days of Jesus Christ or John or Paul or whoever it may be. Now, carrying this one step further, everything in my world becomes animated by the substance of my consciousness. Everything in my world takes on the complexion of my consciousness, and any degree of inharmony and discord in my world is a reflection of the degree into which world beliefs have been permitted to get past the door of my consciousness. We have an old poem, haven't we, to the effect that I'm captain of my ship, a master of my fate. Well, of course, that wouldn't be true except in one sense. In the ordinary sense, it wouldn't be your fault if you're on a ship that sank or an airplane that fell. But in this sense, you would be, because you have the right to be there. And you wouldn't be there if your consciousness were continuously filled with life, truth, and love. There is where our responsibility comes in to be the captain of our ships and the master of our soul and so forth and so on, in the degree, not that we can go around having hocus-pocus power over things out here, but in the degree that we can stay within our own being and realize God as the only presence and as the only power. In that degree, then, realize God as our mind and soul. In that degree are we led not to be in the wrong places at the wrong time. Certainly, when we just live the ordinary human life and say, I'm going across the bay and I'll buy a ticket and go, we go. And if the ship gets there, well, that's good, and if it doesn't, we're in an accident. But supposing we were living this life of conscious reality, morning, noon, and night, realizing God is the very mind of me. As a matter of fact, God makes the decision, and not I. I don't think God would make a decision to be where something unseemly were taking place. No. There would be the degree of guidance and protection that would keep us from injury. There was a book some years ago that tried to bring some of this to light, The Bridge of San Luis Rey, showing these people who were in this accident, taking their lives all together, to see what it was that brought them all to that particular place at that particular time so that they could all get killed together. Well, of course, there was no such thing, and there is no such thing as saying that this brought this person here. This person committed adultery 8 years ago and they're being punished for it today. This person stole something 12 years ago and they were brought here to be punished. No, there's no such thing. The reason all those people were there was just one. They were human beings living a human life. And they were subject to all of the beliefs that are out in the universe. The beliefs of chance, change, luck, astrology, circumstance, whim of fate, and all the rest of it, and they were doing nothing to set themselves apart from it except maybe going to church once in a while and praying, "Oh God, take care of me." A very meaningless prayer, as you well know. No, we are a law not only unto our own experience, but we become the law unto all those who look to us for help in proportion as consciousness is imbued, activated with truth. And so, now here it is. Individual consciousness imbued with truth is God. God is that individual consciousness which is imbued with truth. When we say God is individual mind, it doesn't mean that God is the mind of an individual who is living according to human belief, luck, chance, and change. Yes, God is the mind, but it's not very much in evidence. God is the intelligence of our mind. God is the soul, the substance of our life experience, in proportion as we maintain a consciousness of truth. I'm trying to show you that there's not some God outside of you acting upon you, but that the activity of the truth in your consciousness becomes the Christ or Savior unto your experience. And the longer we sit around thinking that there's something out here going to come to us and act upon us, the longer we will wait fruitlessly. The moment we accept the responsibility that truth teaching has given us, right from, from the Master on, long before, we will understand this, that our consciousness becomes God consciousness only in proportion to our acceptance of the truth of being. One power, one presence, one substance, one law, one cause, one effect, and all that must be done consciously. Not just, I accept that and from now on forget it. No. Every time, or at least for a year, every time an evidence of discord presents itself to us, we must reinterpret it, consciously reinterpret it, until that conscious reinterpretation becomes a habit. Then we no longer have to go through the process or form of it. In the same way that whenever anyone asks us for help, at least for a year or 2 or 3, we should be willing to give a treatment, and the very best treatment we know. After a year or 2 or 3 of hundreds and hundreds and maybe thousands of treatments, the truth becomes so embedded and embodied in your consciousness that instead of having to figure up how much 12 times 12 are, you just say 144, and that's the end of it. Then when somebody asks for help, you may be able to just say, okay, I'm there. And that may be enough treatment. But only will that be true after you have known enough treatments to fill yourself full of a realization of the truth. Many of our treatments are not effective for the simple reason that they're not clean-cut realizations of the truth of being. We make statements of truth, but we're fuzzy about them because we also include few opposite statements of truth, or statements of the opposite of truth. We have to be clean-cut as clean-cut in our realization of truth as we are in our understanding of mathematics or music. Just one little bit of fuzziness in mathematics and we get wrong answers. One little bit of fuzziness in music and we hit the wrong note. We must be sharp and clear in our understanding of what the principle is, so that if we were asked the question, what is treatment, we should be able to give it as clean-cut and as clearly cut as it is stated in these writings. But everybody must know it equally well in order to make their treatments effective. In the same way, when we are asked, what is prayer, what is Christ, why are we able to heal, what is the healing activity, we should be able to give direct answers, quick answers, sharp answers, answers that show that we know our subject. If we don't, the treatment has no more power than the knowledge that went into the treatment. And so our consciousness of truth will be a law of harmony if it's a real consciousness of truth. But if it's a fuzzy one, then we will have a fuzzy demonstration because we'll only have a fuzzy law unto that situation. Let us be very clear about this. In our age, in our studies, there is no excuse for not knowing what is Christ, what is the healing influence, what is the activity of truth and consciousness, what is the law, what is the truth of being. It's so clearly stated today that if we really studied it earnestly, if we were only half awake when we were reading, we would be able to give clear answers to those questions, and that means that the law would be sharply defined within us. Then our consciousness would be a law, a positive law, to everything that touched it. Now that is why Jesus could say, thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me. I would say to you, you have come into this class, you have come into God consciousness. What is God consciousness? It's my consciousness in proportion to its being imbued with truth. And as long as my consciousness is imbued with truth, it is God consciousness. And so in bringing yourself to the class, you've brought yourself to God consciousness. And I say the same to you if you go to a practitioner whose consciousness is imbued, or a leader, or a teacher whose consciousness is imbued with truth. You have brought yourself not to them as a person, you've brought yourself to God consciousness. It was back to what I read last night. You must believe in me, but don't believe in me. Believe in him that sent me. You remember it? You must believe in me, but don't believe in me. Believe in him that sent me. In other words, don't believe in me as a person. I'm no different than any other person. But believe in this consciousness of truth which I embody which I declare unto you. Don't believe that there's only one Jesus Christ in the world, or only one this, or only one that. Because if there were only one or none, it wouldn't make any difference. So far as person is concerned, I can in my own self do nothing. If I speak of myself, I bear witness to a lie. My doctrine is not mine. On the other hand, I do not think it unseemly to do the works of God and to make myself equal with God. Now, what's the difference? It sounds like contradiction, doesn't it? But it isn't. It merely means that as a human, as a person, don't look to me for anything. But my consciousness, imbued with the truth of one power, one law, one presence, one activity, one reality, have faith in that. Have faith in that, and have faith in my awareness of it. And then we'll have healings and lots of it. If you make the mistake of attaching this healing power to a personality, you lose out, even if you attach it to the personality of Jesus. If you understand that the consciousness of Jesus imbued with this truth is God's power, if you will understand that my individual consciousness imbued with this truth, filled with this truth, is God's power, you have the right faith. And you won't be personalizing it, you won't be deifying a human being, and you won't be worshiping a personal teacher. No right teacher, spiritual teacher, wants personal adulation, personal worship, or any of that kind of business, because he knows how nonsensical it is. In and of himself or herself, no teacher or anybody else, or master is anything. Master isn't a man. Master is a degree of developed consciousness of truth. That's the master. The master isn't a man. A man has mastership or masterhood. In other words, has a state of consciousness imbued with infinite truth. And that's the master. So, in the degree that one is imbued with truth, believe on them, have faith in them. Their word will have power, their consciousness will have power. But in the degree that they are not imbued with truth, don't have faith in them. Now, the word I means consciousness. And therefore, I am consciousness. I am spirit. I am soul. That is the reality of my being. And because that is true, everything in my universe is formed of the consciousness which I am. Everything in my universe, including this death, is formed of the consciousness which I am. And it responds to the consciousness which I am. Since God is my consciousness, everything in my universe responds to God. Since God or truth fills my consciousness and is the substance and activity of my consciousness, then life, truth, and love is the substance of the consciousness, the substance of the form of everything within my universe, even if it appears as a chair or a table or a bed or a friend. I embrace my universe within my consciousness. And my universe is formed of and by my consciousness. And my universe is constituted of my consciousness. And because my consciousness is filled with truth and love, my universe manifests the activity and the quality and the substance and the nature and the character of truth, eternality, immortality, eternality. If I have a church, it is a temple not made with hands, eternal in the heavens, even though it appears on earth as a physical edifice. And that church is a divine idea. It is a point in consciousness through which God's blessing reaches all who enter. If I have a class, if I have a student body, it is the temple of the living God. It is church. It is that point of my consciousness through which God, life, truth, and love flows to all who enter. And I stand at the doorway of my consciousness with the sword of truth, permitting nothing to enter my consciousness that defileth or maketh a lie. Therefore, all who enter my spiritual household, my temple, my church, my class, find therein this infinite consciousness of life, truth, and love, and it becomes the substance of their being and of their bodies and of their pocketbooks. This God consciousness envelops them, governs them, sustains them, and enables them to open themselves to the realization of this truth as the truth of their own individual being, so that in their turn they become a law not only to themselves, but to all who look to them for help. If I have a business, that business is a formation of my consciousness. My consciousness formed it. My consciousness governs it, maintains it, and sustains it. And if my consciousness is filled with life, truth, and love, my business is filled with life, truth, and love. If my consciousness is filled with service, cooperation, then my business is filled with just those things. There is only one home. God is my home. God is the substance of my home and the activity of my home. And God is the consciousness of every individual who enters my home, whether as family or friends. And it is for this reason that no one ever enters my home that defileth or maketh a lie, because God is my only home. If that home appears on earth as a material edifice, it will either reflect that harmony or it will be removed. And those in that home will either reflect that harmony or they will be removed. Nothing unlike God can remain in my temple, in my being, in my body, in my home, in my church, in my class. And anything that would enter or be permitted to temporarily enter would be removed in its time, in its way, so that it would be a blessing to everyone involved. It would not imply injury to anyone, but it would be so. Since God is my consciousness, nothing may enter my consciousness that defileth or maketh a lie. And even if I, in my ignorance or human softness, permit something to enter, it will not remain. The consciousness of truth and life which I am will heal it or remove it. I, however, must be perfectly willing that everything and everybody that enters my consciousness be healed or removed. I dare not cling to one and say, I want you with all your force. I must be willing to take my stand with God and say, I leave mother, brother, sister, and father, if necessary, in order to dwell in the secret place of the Most High, where nothing may enter that defileth or maketh a lie. And if my right eye offends me, pluck it out. And if my left hand gets bad, cut it off. Too bad sometimes. It has to be so. If we want our lives to manifest the harmony of God. We must be willing to see some of our patients move on out. We must be willing for some of our students to be moved on out, and our teachers to be moved on out, or our friends or our relatives to be moved on out. We may not cling to any of them if we hope for a universe to be completely filled with the presence and power of God. We must be willing for them to be healed or removed, just as we are perfectly willing for people to come in here sick and know that they too will be healed, or if they can't be healed in this atmosphere of love, they will be removed to some element where they can be healed. Never in my 22 years have I hung on to a patient or a student when the feeling came within them that the time was right to see another practitioner or another teacher. They went with my blessing. Why? Well, for only one reason. I'm sure that if Jesus did not many mighty works in Jerusalem because of their unbelief, the same thing can happen to me. And it may not be because of their unbelief, it may be because of my lack of understanding. And if I haven't it for them, heaven knows they're entitled to someone else who has. If I haven't a particular approach for them, they are entitled under the laws of God to those who have. And my dependence is not on person. Therefore I can bless all those who come and bless all those who go. And you say, that's easy. Not so easy when it comes into your household or into your family. It isn't so easy, but it's just as necessary. Just as necessary. This clinging to that which we know is not right, just because of a human emotion, very often does much to harm our spiritual demonstration. Each one is guided from within in that direction as to when to let go and when not to let go. This point I make to you today. You can be captain of your ship and you can be master of your fate. You can, in proportion to the consciousness of the truth that you permit to fill you morning, noon, and night. You cannot be the master of anything. You must be the victim of anything and anybody in proportion as you permit world belief to take over. And therefore, the demonstration of harmony becomes an activity of consciousness. It isn't something that you can sit idly by and wait for. It's something you must do something about and do something specific about, and that is maintain the truth of being as the activity of your consciousness, and then ultimately everything and everybody that defiles or maketh a lie will be healed or moved on about their own business. Sometimes we try to protect loved ones from the discords and inharmonies that they themselves are bringing upon themselves, not realizing that if only we would loose them and let them have some of those just hard enough, it may be the point that awakens them. Sometimes our keeping them from the results of their own conduct is enough to keep them also from waking to the truth of being. Each one of us has got to learn the lesson of loose them and let them go. Loose them into Christ. Loose them into God and let the law of God govern. Let the law of Christ take over. Not my human will be done, but thine. Jesus made himself equal with God in only one way. He did not permit the beliefs of human experience to enter his consciousness and take root as a law. He stood right there at the entrance of his own consciousness and permitted only truth to have entrance, as when he stood before Pilate, and Pilate said, I have power to crucify you or set you free. Jesus could very easily have said, yep, you certainly have the authority, you're the boss of Judea. But standing right there at this door of his own consciousness, he refuted the evidence with truth. Thou couldst have no power over me except it come from the Father in heaven. Good night. Good night, and please think seriously on this tape.